Michael Marks is the founder of Innovator Partners, which is a company based out of the United States. He's had the opportunity of studying, living, working across 5 continents on this planet. He has founded many companies and sold them, and he has been a part of many boards across various capacities. He has been living in China for the last 17 years, and he's been instrumental in several deals, multi-billion-dollar deals that have been going through the Innovator Partner brand. So, without any further ado, I'd like to.
I have the tough position of standing between everybody and their lunch. So try and make it a little bit light and easy to interact, more of a drama than a monologue, and hopefully keep you guys awake until we have some good Indian food. Just so I know my customer for the next 45 minutes or so. I mean, how many of you are Startups Club members, sort of looking for capital? How many are funded startups that are here as kind of mentors? How many are sponsors or investors or panel members? How many are already out to lunch? No hands. Okay. So firstly, I'd just like to thank Selma and Vivek, and obviously Mahesh Bala for including me in Startups Club. It's a privilege and an honor to be here. I've just invested in Startups Club, and I'm joining the advisory board. And this is part of my yatra, my journey through India. I think I have a lot more to learn, so I'm very keen over the next couple of days and over the life of our relationship to learn as much from you as I can. Just a little bit about me. As Vivek said, I'm a global African, I guess. I was born in Africa, but went to school in Europe. I've worked in the US and Australia, and I've lived in China for 20 years. So I moved to China in the late 90s, and I've kind of been focusing on China-US business since then. Now I've been doing business in India, I guess, for the last 4 or 5 years, personally as well as with our company, and really just getting to know the market a little bit. Just focusing on the startups that are in the audience. This is one of my firm beliefs about DNA. And forgive the Chinese philosophy, but I am from your neighbor, China, where you have 40 years to catch up. But this is the beautiful thing about being involved in startups, right? This is from Sun Tzu, from the Art of War, that there are only 5 musical notes in the world, or 5 tastes, or 5 hues in color. But with those 5 elements, you can make endless flavors, endless symphonies, or endless colors. And that's what a startup is all about. You have to decide, what are you going to do with your core DNA? What can you build? The discussion today, which I've been invited to focus on, is going global. How would you look at the international markets? And are you even ready? Or should you even look at those international markets? So with your DNA, with your core abilities, there we go. With your core abilities, how should you look at the international markets? When should you look at them? Where should you look? And how would you get there? And we'll look at capital today as well. The world is your oyster. So from Sun Tzu to a cliche. Just a little bit about my company, so you guys know whether to or not to bother me during lunch or tea breaks. We are a global business. We're in China, India, the US, and Singapore, really focusing on early stage companies where we can invest and then help with cross-border growth. So where there's actually a real ability to help solve problems across those borders. Obviously, a lot of problems here in India, and we're very, very respectful of companies that want to focus on their core markets and looking to invest in those as well. But our real focus is investing in tech businesses where we can actually help really be strategic and really help with that go-to-market. So much more than a typical investor. I mean, our teams come out of 20, 30-year-old tech companies around the world where they've helped build big brands like Dell or Skype or Motorola or Western Digital, really understanding global markets for technology companies. So as I said, we're in the four sort of key markets of the world, we believe, for technology. And this is very relevant for the talk today about going global. We really help companies shortcut relationships in these key areas, both in Asia and in the United States. And this is something, obviously, if you look at going global for yourselves, this is the real question for you, is how would you compete with another 1,000 startups also trying to speak to Micromax or Airtel or Disney or Amazon, really trying to understand who you are. This is just some of our portfolio of companies. I'll just rush through that. So today I want to focus just on three key areas. The sweet and the sour, the ins and the outs, why, when, where of going global, as much as we can in the next 40 minutes. A little bit about global capital. Heard the comment earlier about Indian investors giving horrible terms. I think international investors can be horribler, but we'll learn about that. And then hopefully some anecdotes, both from China, where I've been doing business for 20 years, internationally, where we've been investing, and then obviously here from India, where I'm still learning. This is a big theme today, knowing who you are. I mean, what are you trying to be? What are you trying to build? What problem are you trying to solve? That is so essential to understanding whether or not you're ready to go global and which markets you should be looking at internationally. So it starts with creativity, novelty and suitability. Suitability meaning you have an appropriate product for the market, and novelty meaning it's innovative or disruptive or truly something unique. Building on that, adding implementation, which is the innovation part of it. It doesn't help to be creative. There's a whole graveyard of great ideas out there that don't get implemented. And your competitive advantage. Finally, that's the growth. Growth here in India or growth globally. And that's the lifeblood of young companies. If you're not growing, you're dying, right? That's the meaning of life. So when you look at being global or staying local, there are various business strategies that you look at. And we're in a university, so forgive me for sounding a little bit academic for a minute. We'll get away from this. But it's pretty simple, right? Taking your existing products into existing markets and simply trying to penetrate more deeply in a really, really core area. Taking those products into new markets, which is your market development and looking at other countries, or starting to look at new products, either domestically, where you're adding to your product range, or globally, where you're trying to diversify across. And this is the definition of global versus local, that some startups are global from day one. Skype, Zoho, Microsoft. Their product is so ubiquitous, other than language, that they can really roll it out globally from day one. It's a core software. A lot of the SaaS businesses here in India, there's a core software, you're solving a core problem. It's very easy to tweak and become global very, very quickly. Other companies are much more local, like Zomato, or Paytm, or Practo, where you've got to actually integrate, like your Razorpay. I mean, your Razorpay is integrated with so many local partners, so many local companies. It's very difficult to go market by market and take that company global. A good example there is Uber, right? So Uber has a very, very core product. It seems ubiquitous, but every single market presents new challenges. They've got to integrate with payment processors, government, drivers, regulators, other partners like hotels. So before we look at going global, and I think this is a key message today, why think global at all? Why not think India? And again, forgive the Chinese philosophy, but knowing when to fight and when not to fight is part of victory, right? I mean, is it actually the time for you or the opportunity for you to go global or not? Everything about India, the challenges, the opportunities, the growth, the population, all of that means there are so many problems and so many opportunities here. We get bombarded with this every day. Right? The GDP growth, per capita income, which we talked about earlier, the amount of capital coming in. India has now surpassed China in terms of FDI into new projects. And then obviously the startup environment here. This was an announcement that was made at the World Economic Forum here in India in October, that India now surpasses Israel and China as having the #3 level of startups in the world. And that's because of groups like Startups Club and universities and the government and investors and the angel network. Still very small compared to global standards in terms of number of active investors and communities. But I said yesterday to the press that it takes a village to raise a child, and I think it takes an ecosystem like this to raise successful startups, especially ones that are going to be competitive in the global market or relevant here to solving problems in India. So maybe we should stay local. A nice proverb, you can often find in rivers what you can't find in oceans, right? That the rivers are sometimes, the rivers that are flowing around India and lush with fish and life are maybe more relevant for you than some of the oceans out there that are very tempting, but not necessarily relevant for you or time-wise. So why would you stay local, right? I mean, lots of reasons. And you know that there are all the challenges of going global, really being able to solve problems here, understanding your own culture, understanding your own market. I want you to think deeply, again, the startups who put up their hands out there and the startups that are funded, really to be disciplined. Don't move 1 inch in a million directions, move a million inches in one direction and make it work. So why go global? I mean, this is a sarcastic comment, right? Nobody's buying our product here in India, we might as well look overseas. But part of that is relevant as well. That for some of the SaaS models here, the market here can be quite small. In terms of access to payments, consumer finance, the fragmented nature here versus a very homogeneous, efficient US market. But again, opportunities multiply as you seize them. That's the real reason to go global, to look beyond your key markets. That as you start to embrace these opportunities, they multiply for you. So these are all this is second nature. That's why I kind of wanted to understand where everybody was. But the reason we look beyond India is, trying to focus on global customers, obviously global investors, global talent. If we have a very unique product or a very unique business model where we need to expand into certain markets to source talent or other resources, to solve unmet needs. I mean, maybe the business model we have or the business that we've invented, whether we're a Tesla or a Nikola or a Faraday or an Edison, maybe we're looking beyond India to where there's an unmet need or an unknown need, which Steve Jobs was great at, an unknown want, going out there and meeting wants that we didn't even know we had. Branding, right? Even for your business here in India. And this has been so relevant for a lot of companies I've worked with in China. They really believe that having a global investor or global customers or global marketing helps their brand back here in India. And that's a perception I hope is changing in India, that Indian companies are not of the same quality. I mean, we don't see real Indian brands out there in fashion, although we're hoping when Bruce Willis wears it, we'll see some global brands. We don't see global brands in fashion or consumer electronics. We see them coming out of Korea, Japan, now China. Interestingly enough, Haier, which is one of China's number 1 or number 2 brands in consumer goods, washing machines and air conditioners, the global market perceives them to be, sorry, I'm speaking too quickly. The global market perceives them to be, I'm hungry too. The global market perceives them to be a German brand. The number 1 consumer goods brand in China, which is operating in 45 different countries, is seen to be a German brand. And I'm hoping that here in India, this branding issue of what is quality, this whole make in India philosophy and approach is going to change branding or the need to brand. New opportunities, technologies, diversification and expansion in a word or in a sentence. And then obviously, what every entrepreneur is looking for to try and solve global problems. That maybe our problems in India are not big enough. We need to look beyond them. So when to go global? When will you be ready? So again, Sun's warriors who are victorious win before the battle and then go to war. People who fail go to war and then try and win. Just a little Laurel and Hardy cartoon to remind everybody, the timing is always the essence of good comedy. And timing is very, very critical in business. So again, I want you to stop and think before you look beyond your core disciplined focus about what's out there and the timing and the relevance of that timing. So when would it make sense? You're already making money locally. You have great unit economics here in India. You've actually proven your business model out. there's some large open opportunity up for grabs which nobody around the world is aware of or able to grab. This is quite interesting in the case of, for example, in Mobi. You're already backed by a global partner like SoftBank, and you take your model to other markets with that partner behind you, or Sequoia, or Matrix, or somebody that's able to open doors and smooth the way. A massive opportunity for your product. India's biggest export right now is software in this environment, and the SaaS models that are coming out, I think, are the best in the world. So maybe it makes sense to think about the timing for going global. How do we go global? Again, back to the university lecture. I think there's a famous book, The 7 People You Will Meet in Heaven. Well, these are the 7 characters you'll meet on your journey to going global. No matter what model you adopt, no matter what approach you take, which markets you look at, always be thinking around these key stakeholders, these key players. What competition are you coming up against? Who are your suppliers? Are they in to help you? Are they in to get you? So no matter what your model, right? Are we simply exporting? That's already going global in some way. Are we doing it through channel partners or distribution partners? Are we simply contracting business from overseas here in India? Are we actually starting to manufacture abroad? I've met a few companies over the last couple of days that are doing their manufacturing in China or Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. And with Donald Trump, maybe you'll move your manufacturing to the US. SoftBank just committed $50 billion to try and help with that. And finally, again, it's great to be defending your position and being invincible or able to defend, but real victory lies in an attack. You can't win by simply defending yourself. So at some point in time, we'll look at an overseas incorporation, actually setting our business up overseas. By the way, robotics classes in China are huge. All my friends' kids, every weekend, that's all they do. So every weekend they're doing their robotics classes. It's crazy. I don't know if you're thinking about China, but let's talk. Or international acquisition, right? So with Zomato, who's one of those local startups, knowing that they would have to, their model, their core software and their core model works in global markets, but they have to reinvent themselves in every market. They have to integrate with payment mechanisms, with the local restaurants, with the local taste. So in Dubai, for example, they have to list the places where they have shisha. In Portugal, in Lisbon, they list the places where you can see the ocean. In London, they list rooftop bars. In the US, they bought Urban Spoon, right? So they made an acquisition. Somebody that already was way up the learning curve in terms of making it in the US, rather than trying to go to the US restaurant industry from scratch. And this is the most like a university lecture, but I'll rush through it quickly. If you weren't falling asleep already, you definitely will be now. So just a little bit of a strategy for market entry, right? Assessing and selecting foreign markets and your product portfolio. Really do the research in terms of which markets, which products, what's suitable, what makes sense. Set measurable and definable goals and objectives, right? I want to be in Singapore by the end of next year. I want to be operating in Malaysia by the end of next year. Then define the market entry, which we'll look at in a bit of detail. Develop your marketing plan, launch, and rinse, repeat, right? Until you get it right. And expect failure, right? I mean, if you're not making mistakes, you're not pushing the envelope probably far enough. Some of these market entry modes we've looked at. Do you look at a joint venture? Do you look at partnershiping? Do you look at going there directly yourself? Obviously, it's sort of infinite methods of looking at the market, but really do the research. And we'll look in a few minutes. There are service providers that will help you and charge you for looking at these kind of analyses. And then finally, all the factors to consider will go into some detail in the next few minutes. But external and internal. Who are we? Who are our products? Is our team ready? Can our team do what it takes? And then all the external variables around that country. Culture, marketing, regulations, taxes, suppliers, the whole ecosystem. So that's a quick run through of how to go global, when to go global, why to go global, looking at our core DNA. Obviously, we need to reflect for some time on what the challenges or considerations would be. In my own homeland, I would possess 100 horses But if I go out there, I have to go on foot, right? Be careful. I mean, it's a minefield to mix metaphors. It's a hand grenade. But what's more challenging than India, right? I mean, if you're already successful here, this is the market that everybody else thinks is the most difficult in terms of coming in, right? The fragmented market, I mean, the low consumer base, if you're not targeting the billion or the, how do you target the billion? The regulations, getting money in, getting money out, the taxes, disappearing, demonetization overnight. I mean, this is, that's unheard of. That's unprecedented anywhere in the world. So, you know, if you're I've rephrased Frank Sinatra, Old Blue Eyes, right? If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, right? So that should give you confidence, especially if you're a SaaS business. I mean, the world is hungry for that kind of intellectual property and that kind of expertise to solve key problems on a software or SaaS basis. That was my handwriting with my mouse. Forgive it. Okay, so if you have decided that, you know, you've done well in India, or India is not the most relevant market, and you've got the confidence to go forward, a whole bunch of challenges to look at. We'll look at a few one by one. So firstly, where do you go? We talked earlier about the efficiency in the US market, kind of the homogeneous nature, internet penetration, access to finance, access to payment mechanisms. You know, the US is a very tempting market, but there's lots of geographies out there that make sense in terms of scale, relevance for your products, and you know, the ability of that ecosystem to support your market entry. So where to go is a big consideration first, right? So Redbus has really gone to Singapore and Malaysia first, right? And even there they had challenges, right? So from a cash on delivery to a payment mechanism, long distance, short distance buses. So again, I mean, Chinese companies have done this all the time. The Chinese companies felt most comfortable moving to Southeast Asia, and ASEAN is one of the top 5 economies in the world now, right? So you're not going to a market, but there's no United States of Asia, right? There's no one solution, there's no one culture, there's no one economy. So in terms of Asia, you have to really think carefully as well, but it's a market that Chinese feel comfortable with. I've been doing business in China for 20 years, and it's really only over the last couple of years that we've seen China start to go abroad. If you look at companies like Alibaba and Tencent and Wanda and CITIC and these kind of resource companies, so they really took 15, 20 years, and that's the life of commerce in China, really, the last 15, 20 years. They really wanted to get it right first in China and then venture slowly into some of these markets. So again, there's no United States of the world. Everybody thinks, you know, where I go there, it's going to be English language, and it's going to be the right payment mechanisms, and there's going to be the appropriate rule of law and contracts, and you know, the right supplier framework and the right customer framework. But in reality, right, the world is a very, very diverse place. So this question of where to go, when to go, the relevance of my product, the ability of my team to make it there, right? Even if they're the A team here in India, they're not necessarily going to be, they won't have the Rolodex, they won't have the expertise, the background, etc., to necessarily make it happen in various markets around the world. And obviously the age-old question of culture. And again, coming into India, one of the biggest challenges for foreign companies doing business here. And all the faux pas that people make in terms of language, right? Culture, politics, like the case of the Ford Pinto that released in the 1970s in Latin America, and Pinto meant small penis, the brand that they try to use. Or when KFC launched in China and finger licking good was translated as eat your fingers off. Or Mercedes-Benz, who came to China and the first Chinese translation was Bin Si, which means prepare to die. So they changed it to Bin Che. Right? Again, these are language, and language is pervasive. And you have enough of those issues here in India with 1,000 dialects. And as you start to look beyond India, you know, really, really be cautious of where the culture will fit. And again, how your culture will be perceived, right? It's not necessarily the friendliest world out there, and the Chinese companies have found the same thing. Regulators blocking deals like Ports and Unicel, $18.5 billion Chinese acquisition deal that got blocked because they don't want Chinese investors owning, you know, strategic assets in the United States. You know, I think Indian companies are going to see the same bias towards making acquisitions and getting involved with companies. Africa, very receptive place right now. Some of the automotive brands from India, Mahindra, and those are doing very well in Africa in terms of branding and expansion. Resource companies, you have to decide where your brand is going to fit culturally and to avoid some of these mistakes. But culture is more than language, right? This is the culture iceberg. I mean, this is something to be really aware of when you go to a new market. On the surface, I always say to people coming into China, there's no such thing as a bad meeting. Every first meeting is a great meeting. The Chinese are friendly. You'll drink some baijiu. You'll eat some great Chinese. There's no bad meeting. And that's a very surface culture, right? But if you look beyond the surface, culture is so much deeper and broader in terms of making it work. What are people's belief systems, their levels of trust, the notions of time, right? In terms of, I mean, for Indians, time is kind of a suggestion, right? Africa too, where I'm from, right? I mean, Africa, we can't pin down times for meetings and things. And for Americans, it's like it's impossible to handle that kind of thing. So be very aware of these cultural nuances as you expand to various markets. It's fun, but it's also the fun part, right? I mean, I've been doing it for 20 years. My home is seat 2A or whatever, but it's part of the fun. It's part of the journey. This is a Hindu proverb. Try to find more local flavor. I don't know how to say it in Hindi. I have to learn. I speak Mandarin, but I can maybe say one word in Hindi. So when an elephant's in trouble, even a frog will kick him, right? So when you enter a foreign ecosystem, and we do this in Africa all the time, I mean, when we go into the game reserves and the wild national parks, as you step out of your vehicle or out of your house, sort of, you're in their environment. You're in the wild. And America is the wild, wild west. So you have to be aware of, as I said, those 7 people you meet in heaven: customers, suppliers, partners, investors. Are they out to get you? Are they out to help you? Wants a piece of you, right? Even I want a piece of you, right? I could, full disclosure, right? Investors are looking for the right opportunities. You have to be aware of who's out there to help and who's out there to not help. And this is just a little caricature of what's out there in the jungle. And this really means in terms of government, local suppliers, partners, banks. I mean, anybody that you will come in contact with, lawyers, accountants, to set up your business, really understanding the key players in that market and how the ecosystem works. And again, this is where I think one of the biggest issues lies, because, I mean, I've been in China 20 years and I still feel like an outsider, right? I didn't grow up there. I don't know all the nuances around me. I've got a great network now and done a lot of business there. But I still, my number one rule for coming into China is be there. So actually physically be there. You can't do it from an aeroplane. And the second rule is find great local partners. And that's what we're doing here in India as well. And hopefully you'll do the same when you venture overseas. So talking about that, obviously networking in China, there's a whole philosophy around guangxi. If you've done any business in China, the whole concept of guangxi is very important. My network, my connections. I mean, LinkedIn you talked about, right? LinkedIn is kind of the technological incarnation of guangxi in terms of who you can reach with 1 degree of separation. So your network is going to be important. How do you establish that network? I mean, yeah, if you worked for Microsoft for 13 years and you went to school in Stanford or MIT or, obviously that's all helpful. But if you're a truly local startup from India, born and bred, you've got to really think carefully about how you build your network. And there is a great diaspora of Indian partners. Same thing for China. I mean, I attended a function 5 years ago. Bill Clinton hosted a Chinese delegation in California. We took finance professionals and Chinese companies to Silicon Valley. We visited Apple, a very rare visit with Apple because of Bill Clinton. We visited Stanford. We went to Intel. And that's because of the local community. The mayor of San Francisco is Chinese, right? So a lot of those doors were opened because of the Chinese. A lot of the successful engineers at Google, we were on the Google campus having free lunch and playing volleyball because they were Chinese. And when the Chinese delegation asked them, when are you coming back to China to help us build China? They said, well, blue sky and white clouds, buy you in Lantian in Chinese. But I wouldn't give up California for anything. Plus, I went to college here. I don't know how to do business in China. I'm afraid to go back to China. I'm sure you see the same thing with a lot of Indians, that are engineers or NRIs in the US that maybe don't even know how to do business back here unless they come in early enough and pound the street like you did. So partnerships, really important. And who you choose, partnerships are chemical at the best of times, right? The kind of chemistry, trust, resources, expertise, very, very important. And obviously, I mean, I'm sure Nago would agree that when you invest, when you take the business out there, there's nothing more important than the team and the talent, right? But again, your core team, your founding team here in India, your best engineers, your best salespeople might have no real, I don't want to use the word value, but their resources, their expertise may not extend as elegantly as you think to France or Belgium or the US market. Just a few cartoons. So when you do look at your team and your talent in going global, I really advise a fusion team, a fused team. I see a lot of Indian companies in China where they send in an Indian team, and there's a trust factor there. I can understand that. And then it's very difficult to hire locally, get the right talent on board. That's going to be probably your number one challenge if you are truly going to incorporate and set up a business and trying to run your business in a very, very remote market. Finding the right people, even in India, is tough enough, right? We talked yesterday at Startups Club in terms of, the hiring challenges here. And those are going to be multifold in foreign markets. We talked earlier about your product base, right? Is it relevant? I mean, is your product really solving problems here in India? Or is it a product that can actually solve global problems or problems in Uruguay or South Africa or whatever? And don't just take your local product and try and twist it for a local market, right? I mean, you really have to adapt. You really have to have the product that meets a pain point, that serves a need in those markets. Otherwise, you shouldn't be making the journey at all. And you're setting yourselves up for failure. We talked a little bit about the legal and the regulatory environment. As I said, coming into India, that's probably one of the toughest, in China as well, where a 5-page contract can close $1 billion deal in China. 5 pages. Same thing in India, right? Short form contracts, a lot of trust. There's a lot that's said and not documented. In the US, you'll see 150-page contracts and lawyers to boot and accountants and tax specialists and governments, as I said, that won't be receptive to Indian investment to begin with in certain sectors. So it's something to navigate with, again, with the right partners or the right frame of mind. And as I said, there are people out there to help you with all of this, including us, but it comes at a cost. Right? And that's one of the biggest barriers to adopting a global mindset is, how do I put this global team together? One engineer, one salesperson in the US, I could fund 20 people here in India and continue to grow my business. Or, yes, I can navigate the legal environment. I can do a great contract with Amazon or Disney or, Best Buy in the United States or whatever. But there are lawyers and there are accountants and there are investment bankers and, all of that is going to be a huge layer of costs that you wouldn't necessarily have if you were here in India and kind of really focusing on your core markets. And India is already fragmented enough when you go to different markets here. So, costs and unit economics. And obviously on the product side as well. What does my product sell for here in India? What could it sell for in other markets? And obviously that's one of the tempting factors about going global is that arbitrage in terms of product pricing. And then we'll look a little bit at the investor environment, something I think a lot of people are interested in and obviously is appealing to Shankar, or you felt comfortable in that environment, obviously, but it is a little bit of a shark tank, and I believe this is becoming popular here in India, but it literally is a shark tank, right? I'll say that because I'm one of the sharks. I can say that. But you have to be really, really careful. You need to find, again, it's like any partnership. Investors are incredibly important partners. The right fit, the right mindset, the right support, the right level of patience for a long journey. So let's take a look at that a little bit. It might seem like this sometimes in India. No capital for 500 miles. How am I going to gas the tank? How am I going to build the business? So we look to the global markets. We say, okay, the Indian capital markets are quite small. Maybe they don't get my terms. Maybe they don't get my sector. So we start to look further abroad. This is just a little bit of a snapshot of the Silicon Valley ecosystem. Obviously, we're looking at this sector here, and there's literally thousands of funds that focus on that sector, but none of them get India. I mean, a very, very small fraction of them really are ready for India. Even here in India, 66% of the capital goes to 3 cities in India, right? We talked about that. 75% of the startups come from 3 cities in India, and this isn't one of them, right? So, even worse, when you go abroad looking for capital, they've got to really think about a management team that's far away, a market they don't understand, an ecosystem they don't understand. But, how do you pitch these sort of guys? Right, so typically there's a larger supply of capital, can brand your business to have a Sequoia or a TPG or a Matrix or KKR or somebody involved. Obviously higher valuations or better terms, and even your ability to talk to banks, to talk to customers, everything is kind of elevated. This is a key thing to think about, right? Like Raja mentioned, 85 no's, right, for one of his investors and 25 for another. Investors by nature are Dr. No, right? We do a lot of business with Google's Eric Schmidt, the chairman of Google, and his $5 billion Hills Fire Fund. Chuck Chai, who's the head of that, is Dr. No. They look at 100 deals a year, maybe 100 deals a month probably. Done 2 deals this whole year. Investors buy risk. That's our product. We buy risk, we manage risk, and that's why we get a return on that risk. But you've got to give us a reason to say yes, or the feeding frenzy of the Shark Tank, which is the other side. And you've all seen that dynamic when you have something really exciting, really unique. Don't forget that investors are actually competing for your business too. But, I mean, they've got to place that capital, otherwise they don't survive. So it's really a focus on balancing the Dr. No's with the feeding frenzy and trying to find the right balance of who I should talk to, how do I pitch my business, and who's going to be right for the business. So this is the total US equity market, 30 trillion, obviously that's including the listed capital markets, versus just 3 trillion here in India, again, a 10 times difference. Even a large difference when you just look at purely VC or PE. And a lot of differences in going to the US market looking for capital. Some of those differences are quantitative, different valuations, how they structure term sheets, how they would expect you to be compensated or not compensated, cost of work and living, depth of your business networks. So really you can quantify the reasons why they would like your company or not. And obviously some are qualitative in terms of whether they would want to look at your opportunity as an investment. The role of your sales team, negotiation styles, equity culture, very, very important. In China, most businesses are still owned by a Laoban, right, the boss. There's no equity sharing mentality in China. And the US capital markets can't fathom that. Right? You go out there as 1 or 2 founders, you own 100% of your business, you haven't given your team any equity, you haven't given them any incentive. There's nothing sexier than a business where you've been validated inside your own community and then you go looking for foreign capital or looking for foreign partners, as opposed to trying to, go to foreign partners first without really proving that your own community can come in and, not your own parents, but your own community can really support you. So this is how we kind of educate some of our entrepreneurs these days in terms of, how to pitch us. You can no longer raise capital on a pure business plan. That's not happening in Silicon Valley anymore. You've got to be at least at a functional prototype stage, which is why I love the whole idea of, you had a working UI with limited functionality. You have obviously the videos. You've got to be at that stage of having functional prototypes. As I said, nothing more attractive than a business that's already been proven in India, with customers or with partners or with government or investors. And then obviously all the rest, right? Your unit economics, or you're running a lean, bootstrapped shop. Have you thought everything through? How do you monetize the business? What's the revenue model? How do you support your customers? So this should be second nature to a lot of you, and I'm happy to take you through this offline. So the old adage of, thinking global, acting local. I think for a lot of multinational corporations, that's been about, and some Indian companies, it's been about thinking about the best out there and applying it here in India, or the most relevant. So McDonald's would have a local menu, or you can, Ola would copycat, or Snapdeal would copycat something that's the best out there, but adapted for the Indian market. What I'm proposing here is that you apply the same thinking, but when you go globally, again, you think globally in terms of where you fit your products, but you act locally for those local markets, right? For those individually local markets. If you've seen it here when companies have come here, you should be applying the same strategy going overseas. So I just want to look at a few anecdotes, just a few more minutes, and then hopefully open questions. We're okay for time. So I know we started late. Can't smell the food yet, though. So just, obviously household names, real disruptors at the time, well, most of them. But also no shortage of challenges, right? I mean, we know the challenges Uber has faced in several markets around the world, most recently in China, where they basically failed. Went up against Didi. Didi had integrated with local taxi companies first, local governments. The founder is the daughter of Lenovo, right? The number one brand in India, in China rather. And really, Didi had done such a good job of integrating into their local community that Uber just failed. If you can call selling your business for $7 billion a failure, but Uber's been so successful in other markets. Again, having a fairly ubiquitous product, meeting an unknown need, and none of us knew that we wanted to be able to, call something up on geolocation and pay seamlessly, and have our records tracked and everything. Skype, as I said, one of those really ubiquitous products. Our investors are the earliest investors in Skype. We've been following that for a long time. A product that's just so relevant in so many markets with data, right? With 3G or 4G, or we're invested in other telecommunication players that are pure USSD, as you mentioned, or actually pure callback, right? Miscalling technology, which is really trying to get the 3 billion people in the world that have never made a phone call the ability to make a phone call. And then lastly, you guys know a lot more about this than I do. I'm just kind of learning, but I would encourage you to go out there and look at successful cases of Indian companies that have gone globally, and look at unsuccessful cases. Look at the mistakes they've made and learn from those mistakes. We talked about Zoho. Really from day one, following the corporate growth in the US and Japan, India and APAC later, right? So where do my corporate clients reside? Where do they operate, and where is my product really relevant? Right? That's obviously a Chennai-based group that chose being a global company straight away. Zomato, we talked about earlier, really incorporating local thinking wherever they went and making a big acquisition in the United States, Urban Spoon, but literally tweaking their offering in every single market that they went to, trying to understand local tastes, local needs. Redbus, we talked about, keeping very close to home, Singapore, Malaysia, moving from a cash on delivery to an online payment, incorporating online payments and digital payments in Singapore and Malaysia. Practo, just a little anecdote about, they had to think about the name Practo, whether it was masculine or feminine in the Portuguese language. And then obviously trying to get local input wherever they went, trying to get bottom-up feedback and bottom-up input in terms of how they would build their businesses in various markets. Fusion Charts, again, global from day one, a charting business that Obama put on the map in 2010 when he said, I'm going to use this product to be the federal platform, the federal government's platform for creating charts. A company that most of you haven't even heard of, potentially. now servicing 80% of the Fortune 500 companies. Prime Focus, again, I'm a big movie guy, big Hollywood guy. Maybe this is a company you've never heard of, but 6,000 people, across 4 continents doing special effects for the movie industry. So really, again, that's a core product, a great need, building something global overnight. VFS Global, an Indian company that helps people get their visas and process visas online, now doing it for 45 different governments. Something. Freshdesk, these InMobi we talked about earlier. Oh, perfect. So that's my presentation. We try to cover a lot of ground in a short period of time, just giving you a little bit of a taste of what's out there and what to think about. We've got some time for Q&A, or you can hunt me down over lunch between mouthfuls.
Anybody has any questions?
Everybody's hungry.
There seems to be a question.
Just stand up and speak out loud, please.
People want to be.
Which are the top industry or top segment that the global investors are looking for in India?
So the question is, what are the top sectors that global investors are looking at? Unfortunately,
In India.
oh, in India, did you say? Well, so again, it's anything that solves a real problem here, right? I think there are so many inefficient sectors. Investors are looking for the right models, as they did in China, and these models evolve. I think, firstly, the outbound model is good, right, where you can take something global. But I think India has become, for good or for bad, it has become the SaaS capital of the world. I think there's a lot of technology here in the IoT market, Internet of Things market, which is not necessarily relevant across India, but in terms of becoming a manufacturing base, and there are a lot of hardware accelerators. I'm sure some of them are partnered with you guys. There's some great hardware accelerators here, where India and China are finding their competitive positions for what China will make going forward, manufacture, what India will manufacture going forward, and I think investors are looking at some of those sectors. But I think, in a sentence, India is a consumer market. The same thing in China. Most of my deals in China were consumer focused, and again, consumer meaning, and there's no one China. So it's consumer businesses that can get scale. I think the valuations and the business models in a lot of these e-commerce companies are really flawed. I think there are some consumer models, healthcare, financial services, education, healthcare, I say healthcare, but sort of real core services businesses, consumer-oriented businesses. Consumer electronics, we're invested in consumer electronics, growing from 70 billion to 400 billion in the next 5 years. There's no market in the world that's adding $100 billion of retail consumer electronics value every single year. Robotics, actually very, very cool. That sort of innovation stuff. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. I would have been surprised if you didn't have a question.
When Uber wasn't here in India, same with Netflix or Amazon, we were really waiting when these services will come to India. So can you just tell us or guide us, sir, is there any services like this that are present in any part in the world that Americans or if people in Singapore are waiting for these services to get launched in their communities?
I think it's a good question, but it goes back to Nagaraj's point about being a copycat, right? Why wait? Why wait for the right models to come? Invent something, right? Invent the future. Don't try and predict it, right? But to answer your question, because I think firstly in China, none of that exists. No Netflix, no Google, no YouTube, no Vimeo, no Facebook, no Twitter. The Chinese market is completely insular. The Chinese market is completely insular in terms of content and sort of this consumption of digital content because of the government and censorship and control, but also because of the local community just building it first. Now Facebook is trying to get in with Mark Zuckerberg studying Chinese and that kind of thing. But there's no way that these, the YouTube and Twitter and these kind of guys are going to penetrate. India, Philippines, Indonesia, I mean, these mobile engagement markets, which embrace these US technologies, you know, are there some out there? I mean, we're seeing a lot of the on-demand economy, you know, on demand, but there's some homegrown businesses here as well. They don't deliver to your PIN code. But the on-demand market's gone crazy. There's a business called MakeSpace, where, again, it's like Uber. You click a button, they come to your house, they pack up all your stuff, take it away. It's basically digital storage. Like you used to have to hire a truck, go to a container warehouse and put your stuff there. They do all of that for you. The click of an app, right? MakeSpace. But they're in cities like New York, Boston, you know, really sort of small apartments, you know, that kind of stuff. But not necessarily that model, but the on-demand model. Click a button and somebody comes and does a, you know, shampoo of your pets right there at your house, you know, dog wash, mobile dog wash. But it's all on demand. It starts with food, but it goes like Airtasker, which is now a massive business, is handyman. What's the business here in India that focuses on handymen? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that on-demand market is very big. I'll think about that. I'll think about, you know, what else is kind of what you should be waiting for. But my message is don't wait. My message is... Yeah, well, and Amazon, I mean, again, failed in China, try India, right? Failed in China, try fig tree. Failed in China, try India. Now they're spending $3 billion to do it, right? And they'll bring other services. I mean, they can afford to lose a lot of money getting it right. It's a good question. I think the way a lot of consumption is moving, I think the world has enough apps. I don't think the world needs any more apps. I think what's happening is you're seeing a lot of in messaging apps, right? So the Facebook community, Micromax here has a lifestyle store on the Micromax phone. You know, I think, you know, within the Tencent ecosystem, which is the WeChat, QQ, you can literally do anything inside that environment. You can order a Didi, so you can order an Uber inside your app, you know, inside your social media platform. You can order food on demand. You can transfer money to an individual or to a business. So I think where social media is moving, I think, is the in-app consumption. You know, once these apps are really sticky, you know, what can you do inside? You can order an Uber, you can book a hotel, you know, you can do a lot of things. But I think what's also happening is a sort of AI. You know, so no longer people-driven searches, but kind of, you know, more like Google Now and you know, those kind of products inside your social environment. That with all the level of analytics, you know, big data analytics, and the power of computing, you know, just as you know, and it's quite creepy actually. I mean, I was heading to the airport in Mumbai, I think, the one time, and my wife's flight came up on my calendar or whatever. You know, like just integrated calendars. You know, really, you know, you land in Bangalore, and you know, do you want to go and eat at Auntie Fung's? There we go. Is he here? You know, so just knowing your previous history, crunching the analytics, I think those kind of social media interactions are going to become very important going forward. Just the AI piece. But the world doesn't need another, you know, social platform or movie platform. But who knows? I mean, who knows what's out there?
Thank you, Michael.
Sure.